"Sir, this seat is not meant for someone like you. Please move to economy." The first-class cabin of Global Air trembled, not from the engines, but from the icy words that had just slipped from the lips of Chief Flight Attendant Clara Benton, 36. Her tone cut through the delicate clink of champagne glasses and smothered the murmurs of businessmen whispering about million-dollar contracts. In seat 1A, Nathaniel Hayes, 42, dressed in a tailored navy suit, lifted his head slightly. Warm golden light slid across his wrist, where a platinum watch caught the glow like a blade. He did not respond immediately. Only his eyes, dark and deep, locked on Clara. For a moment, his silence froze the entire cabin. But Clara did not back down. She folded her arms, heels pinned into the thick carpet like the final nails of a verdict. In her eyes, this man did not match the familiar patterns of first class. No flashy excess, no recognizable face from elite golf clubs. To Clara, he was an exception that reeked of suspicion. Nathaniel calmly extended his ticket for the third time. The metallic boarding pass gleamed, the booking code clear. Global Air 447, JFK to LAX, first class, 1A. His voice was even, steady, like the surface of a lake before a storm. There must be some mistake. Clara tilted the ticket under the cabin lights, scrutinizing it as if it were counterfeit currency. A faint smirk brushed her lips. She nodded slightly to herself. Passengers in this cabin usually don't dress like that. In seat 2A, 17-year-old Madison Lee was live streaming on her phone. The red recording light blinked as her voice trembled. "Oh my God, they're trying to kick a businessman out of seat 1A. This is insane." Her viewer count climbed, 847, 131, 1,047. Around the cabin, heads turned. In seat 1F, elderly Margaret Wilson clutched her handbag tightly, her gaze sharp. She had seen scenes like this before, where prejudice hid beneath the mask of policy. Meanwhile, in seat 1C, Richard Dalton, 55, tie perfectly aligned, cleared his throat loudly. Finally, someone enforcing the rules. His tone carried smug satisfaction, like a club member watching an outsider get stopped at the gate. Emotion spread quickly, like fire on dry grass. Half the cabin watched with curiosity. The other half avoided eye contact, unwilling to intervene. But everyone knew. The air once draped in luxury was now heavy with tension. Nathaniel remained upright. Old scars stirred within him. 8 years old, standing outside the gates of a country club pool, he had heard the cold adult voice. "There are rules. Not everyone belongs inside." The sting of chlorine, the laughter of children behind the gates, the weight of exclusion, all came rushing back. Now, 30 years later, Clara's words reopened the wound like a knife. She tossed the ticket back, brow arched. "Are you sure this ticket is really yours?" A silent twist hung in the air, because in Nathaniel's wallet, beside the Platinum Edge card, was another credential, one that, if revealed, would make the cabin fall silent. But not yet. Not now. Behind her, junior attendant Elena Cruz, 27, whispered anxiously, "Maybe we should just let him be." Clara snapped back. No. Rules are rules. Amid the tension, Nathaniel lifted his gaze from his watch, staring straight ahead. No fear, no pleading, just steady presence, like a mountain about to rise from the earth. Madison's live stream surged past 3,000 viewers. Comments scrolled furiously. Keep recording. Show it all. This is blatant discrimination. His ticket clearly says first class. From row 3B, a young woman groaned with irritation. Please hurry up. I have a connecting flight. The sighs, the doubtful glances, the whispered disbeliefs, all blended into a soundtrack for a drama nearing its peak. Nathaniel finally spoke, his voice quiet yet striking like a hammer. I paid for this seat, and I will not move. The cabin fell into silence. The golden light seemed to illuminate not a lounge of comfort, but a battlefield. Clara blinked, the corners of her lips twitching. In her mind, power still belonged to uniforms, to policy, to rules. But in Nathaniel's eyes was something different, a stillness that threatened to sweep everything away. No one in the cabin knew that the man they dismissed was holding in his hands the power to ground the entire airline with a single call. But that truth was a secret reserved for the moment to come. The familiar sound echoed. Click, click, seatbelts locking into place. But instead of calm, the first-class cabin now felt like a stage brimming with tension. Clara Benton still stood there, ticket in hand, her eyes scrutinizing every detail. She tilted her head, inspecting the embossed numbers, scanning the code with her gaze as if waiting to find a flaw to validate her suspicion. The cabin light slid across her dark red painted nails, casting a crimson reflection on the surface of the ticket like a streak of blood. The half-smirk curling on her lips was a silent indictment. In her mind, the answer was clear. This man did not belong here. Nathaniel Hayes sat still, spine straight, his hands resting lightly on his thighs. Yet behind the calm exterior, old memories stirred violently in his chest. The image of a country club gate, mocking laughter echoing, replayed like a clock winding backward. Every second tightened the wound, binding past humiliation to the present. Once again, he was seen through eyes that whispered, "You do not belong here." In seat 2A, Madison Lee's phone shook in her hands. On the screen, viewer numbers skyrocketed like fireworks. 5,000, 7,800, 9,400. The surge nearly stole her breath. She leaned toward the mic, whispering to her audience. They don't believe the ticket is real. They think he doesn't deserve to sit in 1A. Comments flooded the stream. This is blatant discrimination. Zoom in on the flight attendant's face. What airline is this? I'll never fly with them again. The red light from the camera cast across Madison's face, turning her into an unwilling witness to a storm. In seat 1F, Margaret Wilson never took her eyes off Clara. 70 years old, her wrinkled hands gripped her handbag strap until her knuckles whitened. In her mind, scenes from the 1960s rose again, times when her friends had been denied service simply because of their skin. She knew the taste of it, and now that same bitterness filled this luxury cabin, hiding beneath the guise of policy. Meanwhile, Richard Dalton in seat 1C nodded with smug satisfaction, his starched collar sharp against his neck. His voice was thick, loud enough for all to hear. "Finally. Someone willing to enforce discipline." He cast a cold glance toward Nathaniel, savoring the downfall of another man, as if order was restored by humiliation. The air was so dense that even the sound of a suitcase rolling across the carpet seemed unnaturally loud. Clara's eyes drifted down, pausing on Nathaniel's polished Italian shoes, then to the platinum watch on his wrist. The light flared, catching her off guard for a split second. But instead of doubt, she hardened her conviction. Flashy. Counterfeits are easy to buy. At that moment, a quiet voice broke through. Junior flight attendant Elena Cruz, 27, lowered her head slightly, her grip tightening on the serving tray. "Clara, maybe we should—" "No!" Clara snapped, her voice sharp as steel. "Rules are rules. First class isn't for just anyone." A chill ran down Elena's spine. She saw Nathaniel's eyes. No anger, no pleading, only calm. Yet that calm unsettled her more than rage, as though within it lay a power waiting to erupt. Madison raised her phone again, zooming in on Clara's face. Viewers surged past 12,000. Comments began filling with a new hashtag, @SeatWhileBlack. Nathaniel's voice cut through the heavy silence, low yet resonant. "What more do you want beyond this ticket?" The question struck the air like a hammer. Clara tightened her grip on the ticket, her thin smile returning. In her mind, the image was crystal clear. An outsider, nameless, statusless, forcing his way into a space she believed he did not deserve. And in that belief, she convinced herself she was right. At that moment, Victor Chen, 35, the cabin supervisor, appeared. His presence felt like a verdict already decided. His deep, cold voice sliced through. "What's going on here?" Clara didn't hesitate. "This passenger claims first class. I'm not certain his ticket is valid." Victor nodded slightly, a gesture as subtle as a stamp of approval. He was known for always siding with regulations, an invisible shield that had protected his career. Around the cabin, some passengers sighed, others shook their heads. A young woman in 3B snapped, irritated. "How much longer are we going to wait? I'll miss my connection." Nathaniel lifted his gaze, piercing through Clara, through Victor, and through every glance of pity or disdain surrounding him. He knew. Once again, he had been boxed in. But he also knew. One single move could shatter the box. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket. His fingers brushed its edge. Instead of rushing, he placed it gently on his thigh, his voice calm, smooth as a river, before it swells into a storm. "I need to make a call." Victor frowned. "Switch it to airplane mode. Immediately." Nathaniel gave a small nod, acknowledging, but inside the storm had already broken. Just one call, and the entire game would turn. No one in the cabin knew that the man being denied his seat was the one holding the very keys to the airline's survival. And as his hand hovered over his phone, the world outside, with tens of thousands watching the live stream, was about to ignite. 3:52 p.m. The digital clock on the cabin wall blinked softly. 15 minutes before departure. But the atmosphere in first class felt less like a luxury flight and more like a courtroom awaiting its verdict. Clara Benton still stood firm, her cold eyes locked on Nathaniel Hayes. The ticket in her hand was no longer a slip of information, but an indictment. Behind her, Victor Chen stood with arms crossed, his gaze silently affirming his allegiance. Two employees in different uniforms, bound by the same conviction. They were the gatekeepers, and Nathaniel was the intruder to be expelled. Whispering rippled through the cabin. In row 3B, a young woman pressed, "We're going to be late. Please, just settle this quickly." In seat 1F, Margaret Wilson let out a weary sigh, her voice raspy but steady. "I've seen this too many times before. Different years. Same story." No one responded. In seat 1C, Richard Dalton straightened his tie, his voice deliberately loud so it carried, "Rules are rules. Without them, first class turns into a marketplace." He tilted his head toward Nathaniel, as though waiting for the inevitable surrender. In that moment, Nathaniel lifted his eyes. His gaze didn't rest on Clara or Victor, but passed through them, as if looking toward a memory far behind. The image of an 8-year-old boy, barred outside the gates of a country club, flared in his mind. The words from long ago echoed, "Not everyone is allowed inside." The smell of chlorine, the sting of sunlight, the splash of water he was never allowed to touch. That memory tightened in his chest, merging with the present, once again judged as someone who did not belong. Then Victor's voice cut in. "Sir, phone to airplane mode. Time is up." Nathaniel placed his hand on his smartphone. His finger trembled, not with fear, but with the familiar vibration of a decision about to overturn everything. Before he could speak, a shadow filled the aisle. Officer Samuel Ortiz, 42, Airport Security, stepped forward. A weary shake of his head, his hand resting on his radio. His voice was steady, cold, as if he had delivered these lines 1,000 times. "You have 60 seconds to comply. If not, we will remove you." A murmur spread. Some passengers sighed with relief. Finally someone to fix this. Others stared harder, their hearts pounding, as though they knew this moment was bigger than a delayed flight. Madison Lee's hands shook as she zoomed in. Her live stream had just passed 8,500 viewers. Comments poured like floodwater. "Don't give in. Show the security guard's face. This is clearly hashed seat while black." Clara lifted her chin, a smile ghosting her lips. In her mind, victory was at hand. Just seconds more, and the man would be escorted out. Order in first class would be restored. But Clara did not see. No one saw. In Nathaniel's wallet, the Platinum Edge card glinted faintly. On the iPad resting on the table, the screen still glowed with emails titled "Denver Hub Infrastructure Renewal. Critical. Time starts now." Ortiz's voice hardened, his grip tightening on the radio. Nathaniel's eyes shifted, the icy silence within him sparking into current. From deep inside, words rose, not to Clara, not to Victor, but to the world beyond these walls. "Is sitting while my skin is black a crime?" The question needed no answer. The air itself seemed to contract. Even Ortiz, his hand hovering over the cuffs, hesitated. 30 seconds. Clara glanced at her watch, a bitter smile tugging her lips. In her mind, she already saw Nathaniel dragged out, leaving behind a gleaming, empty seat. 20 seconds. Madison whispered into her live stream. Oh God, they might actually drag him off. The viewer count spiked. 12,000. 15,000. 18,000. 10 seconds. Ortiz barked. You must decide. Right now. Nathaniel rose slowly. His shadow stretched across the aisle, swallowing faces caught between curiosity and fear. But he did not move toward the exit. He stood tall, voice deep, unshaken. I paid for this seat. I am not moving. Silence. Then chaos. Some passengers erupted in protest. Others shouted, "Throw him off!" But from row 2B, a young mother holding her child cried out, "This isn't right. He's done nothing wrong." Two waves collided, clashing in the narrow cabin. Ortiz stepped closer, his hand sliding to his belt, fingers brushing the cuffs. The cabin froze. Nathaniel smiled faintly, pulling out his phone. His voice was calm, each word striking like iron. It's time. Activate Protocol 7. On the other end, a mechanical female voice responded. Confirmed. System entering emergency shutdown mode. The intercom crackled. The captain's muffled voice followed. Ladies and gentlemen, Flight Global Air is now delayed due to a technical issue. Chaos erupted. Some passengers jumped up in panic, others snatched for their phones. Madison nearly screamed into her live stream. My God, he just stopped the entire airline. The viewer count shot past 35,000. The hashtag #SeatWhileBlack blazed red across screens. Clara's face drained of color, her lips bloodless. Victor swallowed hard, his eyes wavering. Ortiz's radio shrieked, his hand trembling. And Nathaniel? He sat down, opened his laptop, and began typing, calm as though the storm had never touched him. But for everyone else in the cabin, one truth was undeniable. The man they had dismissed was the one holding the kill switch to the entire airline. The intercom blared across the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, global air flight is currently delayed due to a technical issue. Please remain seated. The sound was more than an announcement. It was an aftershock tearing apart the fragile order of first class. Clara Benton snapped her head toward Victor Chen, her eyes flashing with panic before she quickly masked it with a cold expression. If you don't understand, just pretend you do. That had always been her survival rule. But right now, her heart pounded in her chest. In seat 1C, Richard Dalton shot to his feet, his voice sharp with anger. This is ridiculous. Just throw him off and be done with it. I have business in Los Angeles. From seat 2B, the young mother holding her child shouted back, He hasn't done anything wrong. You're the ones who did. Two opposing voices clashed, turning the cabin into a suffocating market of chaos. Madison Lee's hands trembled as she clutched her phone, her face lit by the red glow of her live stream. Numbers on her screen jumped like fireworks. 20,000, 28,000, 35,000. Comments poured in. My God, he just shut down the entire airline. Who is he? This is history. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Hayes sat calmly in seat 1A. His composure was the stark opposite of the storm around him. His laptop glowed, its light reflecting on his face. Calm, cold, unshaken. Ortiz, the security officer, pressed his radio to his ear. The voice on the other end was panicked. Nationwide flight suspension. Repeat, all global air flights have been halted. Signal traced back to Carter Systems. Ortiz froze. He glanced at Nathaniel, his heartbeat slamming like a drum. That name was no stranger. He had heard it during security briefings. Carter Systems, the company running Global Air's entire booking and flight coordination infrastructure. Dear God, this man was the one holding the lifeline of the airline itself. This can't be, Ortiz muttered. Clara still clung to a fragile hope. She stepped forward, her voice sharp but trembling. Enough! He's bluffing. A passenger can't possibly stop the whole system. But before she could finish, Nathaniel's phone rang. The deep, resonant sound split the cabin like a funeral bell. He answered before the second ring. A commanding male voice thundered through the speaker, echoing across the cabin. This is Charles Whitman, CEO of Global Air. The cabin went silent. From seat 4A, a passenger stammered. The CEO of the airline, calling him directly? In seat 2A, Madison almost screamed into her stream. Do you all hear this? The CEO of Global Air is on the line with him. The viewer count surged past 50,000. Nathaniel leaned back, the corner of his mouth curling into a faint smile. His voice was steady, decisive. Hello, Charles. We need to talk. Clara swallowed hard, her throat dry. For the first time, her eyes wavered. Victor Chen, once the embodiment of procedure, instinctively stepped back half a pace. Ortiz gripped his radio, sweat dripping from his brow. On the line, Charles's voice cracked with tension. Our system has just collapsed. Tech confirms the disconnect signal came from Carter Systems. Do you understand what this means? Our entire fleet paralyzed. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, his gaze sharp as a blade. Yes, and Carter Systems is mine. I am the one who gave the order to shut it down. The words fell heavy as hammer strikes on stone. Margaret Wilson gasped audibly. Richard Dalton, who had gloated moments earlier, now went pale, fumbling for his phone and muttering, God Hayes, Nathaniel Hayes, CEO of Hayes Tech, contract value, $877 million. The live stream exploded. Comments scrolled in a frenzy. He's the CEO! He just shut down their entire airline. This is history. Clara collapsed into an empty seat, her eyes hollow. For the first time, her uniform no longer felt like armor, but a drenched cloak pulling her under. Yet Nathaniel wasn't finished. He closed his laptop, lifted his head, and his voice struck like a gavel. And Charles, this is only the beginning. Outside the window, the crimson sunset stretched across the runway like a contract laid flat, waiting for a signature. The cabin held its breath, every eye fixed on the man dismissed only minutes earlier, now revealed as the center of power. The air inside the cabin was thick, as if drained of oxygen. Every breath felt heavy and dry. On the other end of the line, Charles Whitman, CEO of Global Air, spoke with a voice weighted by anger and desperation. Mr. Hayes, our system is paralyzed. Hundreds of flights are grounded. I need you to cancel the order immediately. Nathaniel leaned back in his seat, his eyes sharp and cold as steel. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate, untouched by emotion. Charles, this is not a technical glitch. This is a deliberate act. And you need to understand, I will not stop until there is real change. Clara Benton, still slumped in the empty seat, heard every word. The blood drained from her face. It was him. He caused all of this. The thought ricocheted in her mind. The sense of power she had felt moments ago, when she thought she held control, dissolved like foam. Victor Chen, once proud of being the guardian of policy, now stared down at his polished shoes. The rules he once clung to suddenly felt small and meaningless in the shadow of the power unfolding in Seat 1A. Ortiz, the security officer, listened to his radio crackling with chaos. Shouts echoed, "Emergency! Flight paths jammed! Stock price is in free fall!" He looked at Nathaniel as if staring at a man capable of snapping the entire system in half with a single keystroke. In Seat 1C, Richard Dalton lowered his head. Earlier, he had smirked, certain Nathaniel was unworthy of first class. Now he shrank into himself, scrolling his phone, reading the breaking headline, "Global Air Nationwide Shutdown. Hayes Tech CEO, the infrastructure provider, gave the order." In the cabin, every eye turned toward Nathaniel. Madison Lee's live stream soared past 75,000 viewers. Comments exploded like fireworks. "He really is the CEO. One man shut down an entire airline. Listen to what he says next." Nathaniel closed his laptop slightly, then lifted his head, his voice booming like a verdict. "Charles, I have 3 conditions. If they are not met, the $877 million contract will be terminated, and Global Air will sink deeper into crisis than you can imagine." Everyone held their breath. He raised 3 fingers, the cabin light casting long shadows across the tray table like marks of judgment. Condition 1. Immediately suspend Chief Purser Clara Benton, who insulted me and tried to remove me from my first-class seat. A public investigation must follow. Clara froze, her breath caught, her heart plunging like a stone. Condition 2. Every frontline employee of Global Air must complete unconscious bias training within 60 days, no exceptions. And I expect transparent weekly progress reports. Victor swallowed hard, memories of meaningless check-the-box training flashing back. This time, it would be different. Condition 3. Establish an independent reporting system for passengers to document discrimination. That system must go straight to a third party, not buried under layers of paperwork. Nathaniel's voice was unyielding, sharp as a blade cutting down. Silence stretched on the other end. Papers shuffled. Voices screamed numbers about plummeting stock value. At last, Charles Whitman exhaled heavily. "And if we don't agree?" Nathaniel opened his laptop again. A few keystrokes, and the screen lit up with Termination of Service Agreement, Global Air. He turned the screen for all to see, his voice low and heavy as a gavel striking. "Then Global Air will have 702 hours, less than 30 days, to find a new provider for its global reservation system. Projected cost, $2.8 billion. And I doubt anyone could make it happen in time." A gasp broke out from the middle of the cabin. Madison turned her camera on herself, her voice trembling with excitement. "Do you all hear this? One keystroke from him could erase the entire airline." Viewership surged past 100,000. Comments flooded in. "This is justice. Unbelievable, he's too powerful. This will be a Harvard case study." In the cabin, Margaret Wilson allowed herself a faint smile, one tinged with bitterness and hope. After decades, she was finally witnessing someone transform humiliation into power, turning a single seat into a lever. Charles Whitman's voice finally returned, faltering. "Mr. Hayes, you will have our written acceptance within the hour, but this will shake the entire industry." Nathaniel tilted his head slightly, his eyes burning bright, his voice firm and resolute. "Charles, I don't care about shockwaves. I care about change. And remember, this is only the beginning." The cabin fell utterly silent. Even the engines outside seemed distant, leaving only the pounding heartbeats of every passenger in the room. The first-class cabin was steeped in silence, not the kind that brought peace, but the heavy pause of a storm that had only been momentarily contained. On the other end of the line, Charles Whitman's breath came ragged, the clatter of frantic typing echoing through the call, reports, stock values, media crisis. The entire empire of global air now hung by a single thread, a phone pressed against Nathaniel Hayes's ear. Clara Benton sat with her head bowed. The uniform she once wore like armor now clung to her like a drenched shroud, heavy and suffocating. Each heartbeat pounded like a hammer, reminding her that she had been the spark that ignited catastrophe. Her trembling hands gripped the edge of the seat. In her mind, she screamed, "I didn't mean to. I was only following procedure." But the words fell into a void, finding no ground to cling to. Nathaniel drew in a long breath. He did not look at Clara, but his voice cut directly into her thoughts, cold yet fair. Punishment without opportunity is only revenge. Opportunity without consequence is only indulgence. Clara, you will be the first to undergo the training, and after that you will stand before your peers and teach them yourself. The word struck her like a blow. Her head jerked up, eyes wide, not with anger, but with dread. Why? Why me? Her voice cracked, trembling on the edge of breaking. Nathaniel tilted his laptop, letting the glow of the screen reflect across his face, cold and sharp as steel. Because mistakes only vanish when they are turned into lessons. You are not just accountable for your actions. You must transform them into a tool to reshape the culture of this entire organization. Victor Chen, the supervisor who once stood proudly at Clara's side, lowered his gaze. In his mind, he saw the countless diversity trainings he had dismissed as hollow rituals, dull slides, empty words, perfunctory signatures. Now he finally understood the chasm between enforcing policy and enforcing justice, and he knew which side he had chosen today. The wrong one. Ortiz, the security officer, still rested his hand on the handcuffs at his belt. But for the first time, they felt heavier than his gun. His radio crackled with chaos. Nationwide suspension, losses in the hundreds of millions per hour, stock in freefall. He swallowed hard, his eyes locked on Nathaniel. One man, a single man, can break the system. In seat 1F, Margaret Wilson closed her eyes. A tear traced down the deep lines of her face. Half a century ago, she had seen friends forced off buses, denied service in restaurants. Today, in first class, she saw history repeating itself. But this time, someone refused to bow. Richard Dalton in 1C hunched over, his hand shaking as he scrolled his phone. He had just read the projected $2.8 billion loss if the contract collapsed. His finger froze. A single thought echoed relentlessly. The man I dismissed can erase an entire airline with a line of code. On Madison Lee's screen, the live stream exploded past 1 to 20,000 viewers. Comments surged like a flood. This is true justice. He isn't just winning, he's forcing them to change. This will mark a turning point in aviation history. Nathaniel fixed his eyes on the microphone, as though looking beyond the cabin, piercing through to hundreds of thousands watching. Do not mistake this. This is not my victory. This is your test. I do not care if global air is shocked. I care whether you change. Silence thundered. On the other end, Charles Whitman's voice faltered. Mr. Hayes, I give you my word. All 3 conditions will be met. Clara will be suspended and enrolled in training. Every frontline employee will complete the program within 60 days, and the independent reporting system will be established immediately. You will have the signed document within an hour. Nathaniel nodded slightly, his eyes burning with a resolve no one could extinguish. Good. But remember, this is not my triumph. This is your examination, and for this industry as a whole, and you cannot afford to fail. A smattering of applause rose from seat 1F. Margaret Wilson tapped her trembling hand against the armrest. The sound spread, picked up by seat 2B, then scattered across the cabin. Not everyone clapped, but enough did that. Clara bowed her head, tears soaking into her collar. On the live stream, a comment pinned itself to the top. Forgive, but never forget. That is justice. Nathaniel leaned back into his seat, eyes fixed forward. He knew the storm was not over. This was only the beginning, and what came next would determine whether change truly took root. The scattered applause still echoed faintly in the cabin, but outside, the world hall had already erupted. In the Global Air Emergency Operations Center in New York, the wall-to-wall monitors glowed red. The words "System Down" nationwide flashed endlessly. Engineers shouted, hunched over keyboards, but all efforts were futile. Hotlines from airports rang like funeral bells. LAX, all flights held on the tarmac. Chicago, 14,000 passengers stranded. Atlanta, chaos at check-in counters, passengers posting videos. And on Twitter, the hashtag #SeatWhileBlack ignited, climbing to the top in just 7 minutes. Inside the cabin, Madison Lee stared at her phone, eyes wide with disbelief. Oh my God, 150,000 people are watching and climbing. Comments flooded the screen. He's a hero. One man against the entire system. We're witnessing history. In seat 1C, Richard Dalton trembled. Moments ago he had demanded, "Throw him off." Now everything had flipped. He sat silent, head bowed, whispering, "I was wrong. Damn it. I was wrong." Clara Benton heard it. The late confession felt like another slap, this time not from others, but from her own blind arrogance. Officer Ortiz pressed his radio tight to his ear. His superior's voice came sharp and commanding. "Ortiz, listen carefully. The passenger's name is Nathaniel Hayes. He is not just a traveler. He is the CEO of Hayes Tech, the company that runs our entire reservation infrastructure. He is streaming Eve in front of hundreds of thousands. Do not touch him. I repeat, do not touch him. Ortiz closed his eyes, the weight crashing onto his shoulders. The handcuffs on his belt now felt like meaningless ornaments. On the line, Charles Whitman's voice rose, almost a scream. Nathaniel, you have crippled our entire fleet. Our stock has dropped 17% in just 20 minutes. Investors are swarming us. For God's sake, CNN is broadcasting this live. What more do you want? Nathaniel lifted his head, his eyes cutting through the cabin, as if speaking directly to the world outside. I want change, and I want the world to witness it. A story needs witnesses to become a movement. In seat 1F, Margaret Wilson held her breath. She remembered the voices of civil rights leaders in the 1960s saying the same. Without witnesses, justice will be buried. Madison clutched her phone tighter, her eyes shining. She whispered into the live stream, "You are witnessing the unimaginable. A CEO turning a seat into a weapon of justice." On the stream, viewership soared past 250,000. Comments poured like a flood. Tonight, I will tell my children I watched history unfold live. I'm at JFK Airport. People are chanting his name. This is no longer just a flight. This is a movement. At that same moment, on the floor of Wall Street, Global Air's stock board glowed crimson. A CNBC reporter shouted into the camera, "Global Air has lost nearly $4 billion in market value in just 40 minutes. And the origin? A discriminatory incident in first class." In the cabin, Victor Chen dropped his head. He remembered every smug nod, every complicit smile when Clara insisted, "Rules are rules." Now he saw the truth. It was those very rules burning an empire to the ground. Nathaniel slowly closed his laptop. His voice rang out like a verdict. Today, Global Air has only paid in dock and reputation. But if change does not come, the cost will be survival itself. Silence thundered. A silence weighted with the force of global markets. Clara broke down, tears streaming and smearing her mascara. She no longer clung to rules. For the first time, she felt Nathaniel's words were not a threat, but truth. On the line, Charles Whitman exhaled heavily, then spoke, his voice breaking. "Mr. Hayes, I understand now. The full agreement to your 3 conditions will be delivered within 60 minutes. But I beg you, allow us the chance to make this right." Nathaniel leaned back, nodding slightly, his eyes burning like fire. There is always opportunity. But remember, opportunity without consequence is nothing more than an empty promise. Madison turned her camera toward Nathaniel's face. The live stream surged past 300,000 viewers, and beyond the cabin, the shock wave had leapt far past a single airplane. It had become the epicenter of an industry, of justice itself, of the belief that one man could shake an entire system. The faint roar of the engines hummed outside the window. But inside first class, everything seemed frozen in time. No one took their eyes off Nathaniel Hayes. The man who had been dismissed barely half an hour ago now sat with the composure of a judge, forcing every soul in the cabin to put themselves on trial. He turned his head slightly, scanning the room. His voice was low, steady, deliberate, each word falling like the strike of a gavel. Today, each of you is a witness. And a witness does not only record, a witness must choose to remain silent or to speak. Clara Benton clutched at the hem of her skirt, tears still rolling down her cheeks. Her body trembled. For the first time in her life, she realized that her uniform could not conceal her mistakes. Nathaniel's eyes rested on her, not with anger, but with the cold clarity of a mirror forcing her to confront herself. Clara bowed her head, her voice breaking in a whisper. I was wrong. Victor Chen stood rigid as stone. For years he had taken pride in being the enforcer of rules. But now, as he heard Nathaniel utter the word witness, his back felt weighted with stone. He knew that it was his silence that was the greatest sin. He stammered, I could have stopped it, but I chose silence. And now I see, silence is complicity. Ortiz, the security officer, sighed. The handcuffs at his belt felt as heavy as lead. He remembered the moment he nearly locked them around this man's wrists, and the thought made his stomach tighten. His voice was deep, reflective. I used to think my duty was only to follow orders, but today I learned that some orders are not worth obeying. Nathaniel gave a slight nod. He turned to seat 1C, where Richard Dalton sat pale, sweat beading on his forehead. The man who had once smirked at Nathaniel's humiliation now shook like a child stripped of his mask. Mr. Dalton, Nathaniel said, when I was denied, you approved. How do you see it now? Richard lowered his head, his voice trembling like a frayed thread. I was wrong. I supported injustice because I thought it protected my place. But in truth, it only revealed my cowardice. Beside him, Margaret Wilson, the 70-year-old woman, gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Her eyes glowed with compassion, but also firmness. Admitting a mistake is the first step. But remember, next time you must speak, because silence feeds the darkness. Madison Lee clutched her phone, her voice thick but clear through the live stream. Do you hear this? This isn't just a story. This is a reminder. We cannot stand aside when we see injustice. The viewer count soared past 400,000. Comments surged like waves. I will not stay silent anymore. We are all witnesses. This story is changing me. Nathaniel drew a deep breath, his eyes softening. He knew the storm outside was drowning global air, but inside the cabin, a quiet earthquake was shifting hearts. His voice was deep yet warm. What I demand today is not revenge. I do not need global air to collapse. I need it to learn how to rise. I need everyone in this cabin, every employee, every passenger, to understand that respect is not a privilege. It is the starting point. Clara lifted her gaze, her eyes swollen red. Her voice trembled. If I get a chance, I will change. I will learn, and I will teach others. Victor added, his tone firmer. So will I. I used to think I was strong when I enforced rules, but today I see justice is stronger than any rule. Ortiz nodded, his hand loosening from the cuffs. And sometimes, courage is not in following orders, but in refusing them when they are wrong. Margaret smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. At last, I have lived long enough to see this. One man denied seat 1A, turning that moment into a milestone for a generation. Nathaniel straightened in his seat, his voice resonant. Remember this. A seat may be small, but when a seat is denied because of prejudice, it becomes a symbol, and when that symbol is overturned, it can shake the entire world. First class fell into silence. Then, without signal, a ripple of applause began. From Margaret in 1F to the young mother in 2B, it spread. Not everyone joined, but enough to fill the cabin with a rare sound, the sound of hope. Madison tilted her camera, her voice steady to hundreds of thousands watching. If one moment can change these people, it can change all of us. Morning sunlight stretched across the glass facade of the Hayes Tech Tower in Los Angeles, turning the windows into mirrors reflecting the sky. On the 42nd floor, the main conference room glowed bright, where the entire executive board had gathered. In front of them lay a report more than 100 pages thick, its cover stamped with the Global Air logo. Nathaniel Hayes sat at the head of the table, back straight, dressed in a deep navy suit that framed his posture with precision. His eyes moved across the pages without surprise, only confirmation of what he had already foreseen that day in first class. Page 3. The numbers were clear. Complaints related to bias had dropped by 67%. 94% of frontline staff had completed unconscious bias training, and the zero-tolerance policy had been rolled out across 67 operational centers. These numbers were not just data. They were proof that the moment on Flight 447 had not died with a live stream. It had taken root, sprouted, and grown into real change. Rachel, Nathaniel's long-time assistant, placed a cream envelope on the table. "A letter," she said softly. "From Clara Benton." The room fell silent. Nathaniel opened the envelope. Handwritten words, slanted and slightly shaky yet firm, filled the page. "Mr. Hayes, I completed the training last week. It was the hardest but most necessary experience of my career. I am not asking for forgiveness. I only want to thank you for forcing me to face myself. Next month, I will begin a new role as a bias training coordinator for staff. I will dedicate at least a year to helping others see what I was once blind to. You turned my mistake into an opportunity. I will not waste it. Clara Benton." Nathaniel closed the letter and placed it gently beside the report. For a moment, his face softened. He knew this was the true victory, not when a company's stock rebounded, but when someone once in the wrong became a guide for change. The desk phone rang. Rachel put it on speaker. The bright voice of Maya Hayes, his daughter calling from her college dorm, filled the room. "Dad, did you hear? United Airlines just signed on to use Hayes Tech's training program. And Delta and Southwest are considering it too." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "Not me, Maya. Us. This is a movement we all started." On the big wall screen, an economic news feed rolled. The hashtag #SeatWhileBlack had reached 2.3 million mentions, and over 40 corporations had contacted Hayes Tech to learn about its bias training program. Nathaniel's eyes drifted out the window. Far below, streams of cars glinted like silver threads in motion. He saw the larger picture. Hotels revising their check-in procedures, restaurant chains rewriting service protocols, rental companies adopting no-bias policies. One story, born from one seat, had forced an entire industry to confront itself in the mirror. His phone buzzed, a message from an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Hayes, this is Officer Daniel Ortiz from that day at JFK. I just completed the training. It opened my eyes to things I had never realized. Thank you for choosing decency instead of destruction." Nathaniel read it and exhaled quietly. This was not success measured in stock prices or contracts. This was success measured in people when someone changes not because they are forced, but because they truly want to. He returned to the table and flipped to the final page of the report. Title: Industry Impact. 7 major companies had adopted similar policies. 3 states had introduced or strengthened anti-discrimination laws, and complaints in the airline industry had dropped by 38% in the first quarter alone. Nathaniel placed his hand on the keyboard, but did not type immediately. In his mind, he heard again the silence of that cabin, the moment he had said, "A story needs witnesses to become a movement." Now those witnesses had become messengers, and the story no longer belonged to him, it belonged to everyone. He opened an email reply to Clara. "Thank you, Clara. Remember this. Change does not end when the course is over. It only ends when no one needs the course anymore." In the morning light streaming through the glass, Nathaniel allowed himself a faint smile. Because he knew Flight 447 had not only landed an airline, it had launched a movement. The Washington, D.C. National Convention Center shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. More than 3,000 people filled the hall. Activists, lawyers, students, business leaders, all gathered to hear the name that had become a symbol: Nathaniel Hayes. Behind the stage, a massive LED screen glowed with the words, "Keynote Speaker, Nathaniel Hayes, CEO Hayes Tech." When Nathaniel stepped out in a deep navy suit and a simple tie, the hall erupted in thunderous applause. But he did not rush to speak. He stood still for several seconds, his gaze sweeping the audience as if to memorize every face. Then his voice rose, deep and resonant, not loud, but powerful enough to strike the heart. 6 months ago, I was just a passenger on Flight 447 from New York to Los Angeles. 6 months ago, I was asked to leave my first-class seat, not because of a technical or security issue, but because someone thought I did not belong there. A ripple of murmurs spread. Heads nodded, eyes glistened. Nathaniel continued, calm but unwavering. That day, I had 2 choices. 1, to stay silent and move to a lower seat. 2, to use the power I had to force the system to change. I chose the second. On the screen behind him appeared the blurred image of the first-class cabin. Madison Lee, the 17th-year-old girl from that day, now the official live stream coordinator of the conference. The number in the corner, 2.4 million viewers watching worldwide. Nathaniel briefly recounted the events on the plane, but did not dwell. He paused at the moment he said Protocol 7. Some in the hall chuckled, others clenched their fists as if they themselves had been there. In the VIP section, Clara Benton sat beside Victor Chen. Both wore modest suits, name tags pinned to their chests. Clara Benton, Director of Bias Prevention Program at Global Air. Victor Chen, Customer Policy Advisor for the Airline Alliance. When the spotlight swept over them, they lowered their heads, carrying both shame and gratitude. They were living proof of what Nathaniel was about to say. Nathaniel raised his hand toward them, then turned his gaze to the entire hall. The question is not whether discrimination exists. We all know the answer. The question is, when it happens before your eyes, what will you do? Will you turn away and stay silent? Or will you stand up and use whatever power you have, your voice, your vote, or simply a word of protest, to make change? Thousands of phones lit up, glowing across the hall. The live stream surged. I will not stay silent anymore. Stand up, starting today. We are all witnesses. Nathaniel clicked to the next slide. Behind him, 3 bold words appeared. Consequences. Opportunity. Witnesses. To create change, we need 3 things, he said. First, real consequences for wrongdoing. Second, opportunities for those who have failed to repair their mistakes and become agents of change. And third, witnesses. People who refuse to stand aside, who refuse to remain silent. He looked toward Clara and Victor. The person who once told me, "This seat is not for you," is now training thousands of employees, so they will not repeat that mistake. The man who once supported a wrong decision is now writing policies to protect customers. That is what it means when opportunity is given and taken. A wave of applause thundered through the hall, not for a fairy tale ending, but for the truth that real change comes from the very links in the chain that once failed the system. Nathaniel lowered his voice, its edge sharper. If that day I had only called the CEO of Global Air privately to demand Clara be punished, perhaps I would have won a small battle. But there would be no new policies, no training program, no hashtag #SeatWhileBlack becoming a movement, and 23 states would not have rewritten their laws. On the screen, figures appeared. Bias complaints in aviation down 73%. 98% of frontline staff completed training. 7 corporations outside the industry adopted similar policies. 3 states passed or strengthened anti-discrimination laws. The hall rose to its feet in applause. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Nathaniel lifted his head, his voice booming like thunder. True change does not happen in a single, explosive moment. It happens when each person, from CEO to frontline worker, from passenger to citizen, chooses to be better than they were yesterday. He paused, locking eyes with the live stream camera as though speaking directly to millions. The next time you witness injustice, you have 2 choices: to remain a spectator or to become a witness for change. The decision is yours. Behind him, the screen glowed with the words, #WitnessForChange. Live stream comments surged, 500,000 in just 40 minutes. As Nathaniel stepped away from the podium, the spotlight followed. Clara walked forward, her voice trembling but steady. Thank you, not only for giving me a chance, but for teaching me that true justice comes when all of us change together. Nathaniel placed a hand on her shoulder, and smiled gently. And now, it will be you teaching that to others. The hall rose again, applause swelling into a wave crashing against the vaulted ceiling. Outside the convention center, the afternoon sun poured over the avenue, glowing gold like the dawn of a new era. In this world, power can buy a first-class ticket. It can buy seat 1A, and even the silence of an airline. But there is one thing it can never touch: the dignity of a human being. Nathaniel Hayes turned a moment of humiliation into a catalyst, transforming a denied seat into a lever that forced the entire airline industry to change. And from that first-class cabin, a movement took flight, spreading to Congress, to corporations, and into the hearts of millions around the world. This story reminds us that justice does not come from an explosion of anger, but from deliberate action and the courage to refuse silence. If you believe that one voice can shift an entire system, hit like to spread this message. Do not forget to subscribe to join us in more stories of justice and resilience, and leave a comment with the phrase, "Stand up," so the world knows you will not stand aside when injustice occurs. Because sometimes all it takes is one witness brave enough to speak up, to change an entire era.